Perfect. We'll start your story in English based on the title, The Mail-Order Bride Arrived Crying. But the cowboy's words changed everything. Here's the first 10 paragraphs. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rolling hills when Clara stepped off the rickety stagecoach, her small suitcase clutched tightly in trembling hands. Her eyes were red from crying, and the dusty road beneath her boots seemed to stretch endlessly, mirroring the uncertainty that churned in her chest. For weeks she had imagined this moment, the moment she would meet Daniel, the man who had written to her with promises of a new life, a safe home, and perhaps even love. Yet reality was harsher than any letter. The town was quiet, the air thick with the scent of hay and smoke from distant chimneys. No one rushed to greet her, the world seemed to pause, watching her with quiet curiosity as she struggled to steady herself. From across the street, a tall figure emerged, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. Daniel, the cowboy she had corresponded with for months, wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but even from a distance, Clara could see the gentleness in his stance. His letters had promised patience, understanding, and respect, and in this moment, that promise felt tangible. He didn't rush to her side, didn't call her name in a booming voice. He simply stood there, steady and patient, as if silently assuring her that it was all right to be scared. Clara tried to lift her chin, to put on a brave face, but a fresh wave of tears overpowered her. She had left behind her home, her family, and everything familiar, believing in a future she could barely picture. Now, with the reality of the unknown stretching before her, she felt more fragile than ever. The wind tugged at her coat, and she clutched the suitcase tighter, afraid that letting go of it might somehow make her new life vanish. Daniel took a cautious step forward, his presence calm, unwavering, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside her. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, I'm here. Daniel's voice, when he spoke, was soft yet certain. I know. You're safe now. His words didn't demand anything from her, they offered a quiet reassurance. Clara felt her heart skip, the heavy weight in her chest easing slightly. She had expected strangers to greet her with suspicion or curiosity, perhaps even judgment. Instead, Daniel met her vulnerability with understanding. His presence was a promise of patience, a lifeline in the swirling uncertainty of her new life. He stepped closer, careful not to overwhelm her, and offered a small smile. You don't need to pretend with me, he said gently. You can be tired. You can be scared. You can even cry. The simplicity of his words caught Clara off guard. No one had ever allowed her to be truly vulnerable without fear of ridicule or dismissal. She nodded faintly, the first trace of relief softening the taut muscles in her shoulders. Somehow, hearing that she didn't have to be perfect made the world feel a little less threatening. Clara took a hesitant step forward, the suitcase dragging slightly behind her. Daniel tilted his hat back, his eyes scanning her face with quiet attentiveness. The house isn't far, he said. We'll get you settled, and then you can rest. She nodded again, struggling to find her voice, but Daniel's calm manner gave her the courage to move. Every step toward the small wooden house felt like a step toward hope, a chance to leave behind the pain and fear that had defined her life until now. As they approached the ranch house, the sound of distant cattle and the creak of old wood under the porch floor welcomed them. Daniel opened the door with a gentle push and gestured for Clara to enter first. The interior smelled faintly of pine and leather, a comforting scent that hinted at warmth and familiarity. She stepped inside, glancing around at the simple furnishings and the neat organization of the home. It was modest but welcoming, a sanctuary far removed from the chaos and heartache she had left behind. Clara set down her suitcase on the polished wooden floor and allowed herself a moment to breathe. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the room. Her heart, still heavy from the journey, began to feel a little lighter. Daniel remained near the doorway, giving her space but staying close enough to offer reassurance. His patience and calmness were grounding, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt the possibility of safety, of belonging. "Thank you for waiting for me," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's smile widened just slightly. "I told you I would," he said simply, with no hint of impatience or judgment. His steady tone reminded her that not every man sought control or demanded gratitude. Some offered kindness because it was the right thing to do. Clara felt her chest loosen with relief, tears threatening again but this time mingled with a fragile sense of hope. Perhaps she had made the right choice in coming here. Walking to the window, Clara looked out over the rolling fields that stretched beyond the house. The sun painted the landscape in golden hues, the scent of wild grass and fresh earth drifting through the open window. She imagined herself working alongside Daniel, learning the rhythm of ranch life, tending to the animals, and finding a place for herself in this new world. Fear still lingered, but with each breath of fresh air, with each glance at Daniel's quiet presence, Clara felt a flicker of courage ignite within her. She might be small and fragile now, but she was not without hope. That evening, the sky above the ranch slowly turned a deep shade of orange and purple as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills. Clara stood quietly by the window, watching the wide open land that stretched farther than she could see. Back in the town she had left behind, the streets were crowded and noisy, but here everything felt calm and slow, almost peaceful. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, making a soft whispering sound that somehow eased the tension in her chest. Behind her, Daniel was lighting a small lantern on the wooden table. Its warm glow filled the room, pushing away the shadows of the evening. Clara realized she had not eaten since early morning, yet the strange mix of nerves and exhaustion had hidden her hunger. Daniel noticed the way she held her stomach slightly and said softly, "You must be hungry after such a long trip." Clara turned toward him, embarrassed. "I didn't want to trouble you," she replied quietly. Daniel gave a small shake of his head, almost amused by her words. "You're not troubling me," he said. "You're home now. That means you're part of this place." The sentence was simple, but it made Clara pause. Part of this place. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She watched as Daniel placed 2 plates on the table and brought out a pot of warm stew that smelled of herbs, potatoes, and slow-cooked beef. The rich scent filled the room, making her stomach growl softly. Daniel pretended not to notice so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. Instead, he poured her a glass of water and gently pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said kindly. "Food tastes better when you're not standing like you're about to run away." Clara sat down slowly, still unsure of how to behave. Her life until now had been filled with rules, rules about how to speak, how to sit, how to behave around others. But Daniel didn't seem to expect any of that. He simply sat across from her and began eating quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds in the room were the clink of spoons against bowls and the soft crackling of the lantern. Clara tasted the stew carefully, and her eyes widened in surprise. It was warm, comforting, and far better than she had expected from a cowboy who lived alone on a ranch. Daniel noticed her expression and chuckled softly. "Old ranch trick," he said. "If you can cook well, life out here gets a whole lot easier." Clara smiled faintly, the first genuine smile that had touched her lips all day. "It's very good," she admitted. Daniel tipped his hat slightly in thanks before continuing to eat. After a few quiet moments, Clara gathered the courage to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind since she arrived. Why did you write to me?" she asked carefully. Daniel paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. For a moment, he seemed to search for the right words. Then he set the spoon down and leaned back slightly in his chair. "Because I was tired of being alone," he said honestly. "And because when I read your letter, it sounded like you were tired of being alone too." Clara looked down at the table, surprised by the honesty in his answer. Most people hid their feelings behind careful words, but Daniel spoke as if the truth was the simplest thing in the world. "I didn't know if you'd actually come," he added with a small shrug. "But I hoped you would." Clara felt something warm spread through her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust. She realized that Daniel had taken a risk just like she had. Two strangers had believed in the possibility of a better life, even though neither of them knew what the future would bring. After dinner, Daniel stood and began clearing the table. Clara quickly rose to help, but he gently stopped her with a raised hand. "You've traveled for days," he said. "Rest tonight. Work can wait until tomorrow." Clara hesitated, unused to being told she didn't have to earn her place immediately. But Daniel's calm confidence made it hard to argue. Instead, she watched as he washed the dishes at the small sink near the window. The quiet domestic moment felt strangely comforting. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Clara felt her body begin to relax. Outside, the night had fully settled over the ranch. Crickets chirped in the grass, and somewhere in the distance a horse stamped its hoof against the ground. Daniel stepped onto the porch for a moment to check on the animals, leaving the door slightly open. Clara wandered back to the window, gazing out at the vast dark fields under a sky filled with stars. She had never seen so many stars before. They seemed endless, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. When Daniel returned, he noticed her staring upward through the window. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly. Clara nodded slowly. "I've never seen the sky like this before," she admitted. Daniel leaned against the wall beside the door, looking out at the same sky. "Out here," he said, "the world feels bigger. Problems don't disappear, but they don't feel as heavy either." Clara thought about his words carefully. Perhaps that was why this place felt different already. A cool breeze drifted through the open doorway, carrying the scent of grass and earth. Clara wrapped her arms lightly around herself. Daniel noticed and closed the door gently to keep the warmth inside. "You should get some sleep," he said kindly. "Tomorrow we'll show you the ranch. No pressure. Just a walk, if you're up for it." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was. The long journey, the fear, and the emotions of the day had drained her completely. As Clara walked toward the small bedroom at the back of the house, she paused at the doorway and looked back at Daniel. He was adjusting the lantern on the table, his expression calm and thoughtful. For a moment she simply watched him, realizing how different he was from the men she had known before. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked up. "Yes." Clara hesitated, then whispered the words she truly meant. "Thank you, for being kind." Daniel smiled gently and replied, "Kindness should never be rare, Clara. Around here, we try to keep plenty of it." Clara closed the bedroom door softly behind her and sat down on the edge of the small bed. The room was simple but warm, with a wooden dresser, a small lamp, and a window that looked out across the dark ranch land. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the quiet. The silence felt strange at first. In the town she had come from, there was always noise, people arguing, carts rolling through the streets, doors slamming. But here the silence felt peaceful rather than lonely. She slowly removed her coat and placed it over the chair, then looked at the small suitcase she had carried all the way across the country. It held everything she owned now. Yet somehow, for the first time in a long while, that thought didn't frighten her. Clara opened the suitcase and carefully took out a small bundle of letters tied with a thin ribbon. These were Daniel's letters, the ones that had convinced her to make this journey. She ran her fingers over the worn paper, remembering how many nights she had spent reading them by candlelight. His words had always been simple, honest, and kind. He never promised riches or an easy life. Instead, he had promised respect, patience, and a chance to build something real together. At the time, those promises had felt like distant dreams. But now she was here, standing inside the very life those letters had described. Meanwhile, in the main room of the house, Daniel sat quietly at the wooden table. The lantern's warm light flickered gently across the walls as he leaned back in his chair, thinking about the day. When he first saw Clara step off the stagecoach crying, he had felt a sharp ache in his chest. He knew life had not been easy for her. No one traveled that far alone unless they were running from something painful. But he also saw strength in her, the quiet kind of strength that didn't shout but endured. Daniel had spent most of his life working hard on the ranch, yet tonight he realized something important had changed. The house no longer felt empty. Clara lay down on the bed but found it difficult to fall asleep right away. Her mind replayed everything that had happened since she arrived. Daniel's calm voice, the warm meal, the gentle way he treated her, it all felt almost unreal. She had expected suspicion or indifference, maybe even regret from the man who had agreed to marry a stranger. Instead, he had welcomed her with patience and kindness. She stared up at the wooden ceiling, wondering if she truly deserved such gentleness. A small part of her feared that it might disappear if she made a mistake. After a while, exhaustion finally began to take over. The soft chirping of crickets outside the window created a quiet rhythm that slowly calmed her racing thoughts. Clara closed her eyes, and her breathing gradually became slower and deeper. For the first time since leaving her old life behind, she slept without fear. No shouting voices. No heavy footsteps in the hallway. Just the peaceful silence of the countryside. Early the next morning, the first golden rays of sunlight slipped through the bedroom window and gently touched Clara's face. She stirred slowly, blinking as she adjusted to the light. For a moment she forgot where she was. But then she heard the distant sound of horses and the faint clatter of tools outside. The memory of yesterday returned instantly. She sat up quickly, realizing she was truly on Daniel's ranch. Her new life had officially begun. Clara dressed quickly and stepped out of the bedroom. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, making her pause in surprise. In the kitchen, Daniel stood near the stove pouring 2 cups of steaming coffee. When he noticed her, he gave a small friendly nod. "Morning," he said. "I wasn't sure when you'd wake up, but I figured coffee would help." Clara smiled shyly. "Good morning," she replied. Her voice sounded softer than usual, still adjusting to the new environment. Daniel placed a cup on the table and gestured for her to sit down. "Sleep all right?" he asked casually. Clara nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." Daniel seemed genuinely pleased to hear that. He took a sip of his coffee and glanced toward the window where the morning sun illuminated the fields. "After breakfast, I can show you around the ranch if you'd like," he said. "No rush. Just so you know where everything is." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat spread through her fingers. She looked out the window and saw the wide fields glowing in the soft morning light. A few horses grazed peacefully near the barn, their tails swishing lazily. The sight filled her with a quiet sense of wonder. This place was so different from anything she had known before. Yet something about it felt right, like the beginning of a story she had been waiting to live. She turned back to Daniel, meeting his eyes with a little more confidence than the day before. "I'd like that," she said. Daniel smiled slightly, pleased by her answer. "Good," he replied. "Because there's a lot to see." As the morning sun rose higher over the ranch, Clara felt a small spark of excitement growing inside her. Yesterday she had arrived in tears, unsure of everything. But today, standing in the warm kitchen with a cup of coffee and a kind cowboy beside her, she began to believe that maybe this new life could truly change everything. After they finished their coffee, Daniel stood up and grabbed his hat from the wooden hook near the door. The morning sun had grown brighter, spilling warm golden light across the open fields outside. Clara followed him to the porch, feeling a gentle breeze brush across her face. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of grass and soil. For a moment she simply stood there, taking it all in. The ranch stretched wide and peaceful in every direction. Daniel noticed the way she looked around with quiet wonder and smiled slightly. "It's not much compared to the big ranches out west," he said, "but it's honest land." Clara shook her head softly. "It's beautiful," she replied. She had never seen so much open space before. In the town she had come from, buildings stood close together, and the sky always seemed smaller somehow. Here the sky felt endless, stretching above them in a clear blue arch. Daniel walked down the wooden steps and motioned for her to follow. "Come on," he said kindly. "Let me show you the place." Clara stepped down beside him, her boots touching the dry earth of the ranch yard. Their first stop was the barn. The large wooden doors were already open, and several horses stood calmly inside their stalls. The animals lifted their heads as Daniel entered, recognizing him instantly. One brown horse let out a soft whinny and nudged the gate with its nose. Daniel chuckled and gently stroked its neck. "That's Daisy," he said. "She's the one who was making all that noise last night." Clara stepped closer, a little cautious but curious. The horse's dark eyes looked gentle and intelligent. "She's beautiful," Clara said quietly. Daniel nodded. "She's also stubborn," he added with a small grin. Clara laughed softly, and the sound seemed to fill the barn with warmth. It was a light, genuine laugh, and Daniel noticed it immediately. Yesterday she had seemed fragile and overwhelmed, but today there was a small spark of life in her expression. He handed her a small carrot from a wooden bucket nearby. "Go ahead," he said. "She'll like you if you bring snacks." Clara hesitated, then carefully held the carrot out. Daisy sniffed it eagerly before taking it from her hand with surprising gentleness. Clara's eyes widened in delight. "She's so careful," she said. Daniel leaned against the stall door, watching the moment with quiet satisfaction. "Animals are good judges of people," he said. "If Daisy trusts you, that's a good sign." Clara stroked the horse's soft nose, feeling a small wave of happiness she hadn't expected. After leaving the barn, Daniel led her toward the open fields. The tall grass swayed gently in the breeze, creating a soft rustling sound. In the distance, a group of cattle moved slowly across the pasture. Clara watched them with fascination. Everything about ranch life seemed peaceful yet full of quiet activity. "Doesn't it get lonely out here?" she asked after a moment. Daniel thought about the question before answering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But the land keeps you busy, and the quiet helps you think." They walked along a narrow path that led to a small hill overlooking the ranch. From the top, Clara could see the entire property, the barn, the house, the grazing animals, and the wide field stretching far beyond. The view took her breath away. "I didn't realize how big it was," she said softly. Daniel rested his hands on his belt and looked out across the land he had spent years caring for. "It's been my whole world for a long time," he said. Clara studied his face as he spoke. There was pride in his voice, but also something deeper, something that hinted at years of hard work and quiet solitude. "Is that why you wrote to me?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded once. "Partly," he said. "A ranch is a lot to handle alone. But more than that. I wanted someone to share it with." His words were honest and simple, yet they carried a quiet sincerity that touched Clara's heart. The wind picked up slightly, brushing strands of Clara's hair across her face. She looked out across the fields again, imagining what life here might be like in the months ahead. There would be long days of work, early mornings, and challenges she had never faced before. But there would also be peace, fresh air, and the steady presence of the man standing beside her. For the first time since arriving, Clara felt less like a stranger and more like someone who might actually belong here. Daniel glanced at her thoughtfully. "I know this is all new for you," he said. "You don't have to decide everything today. Just take your time and see how you feel." Clara looked at him and nodded slowly. His patience made the future feel less frightening. As they stood together on the small hill overlooking the ranch, Clara realized something important. Yesterday she had arrived crying, unsure if she had made a terrible mistake. But today, with the sun shining and the land stretching endlessly before her, she felt something different growing inside her, hope.